Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد إخوة الإسلام يا عباد الله. This particular clip is advice to the administrations of masajid throughout the U.S., specifically those in the intercity. And basically the advice would be to get organized, to become more organized. And the reason why I say that is because most of masajid in the U.S., if not all, usually file their organization as religious nonprofits or 501c3s. And this particular video is not about should the masjid be filed as a 501c3 or a 508c1a or whatever the case may be. This particular, the intent of this video is not about that. The intent of this video is that because we find that most masajid are filed as 501c3, and we find that the administrators of these masajid are not tapping into the full potential as it relates to a 501c3 and making it grow and making the things that are attached to a 501c3 work for them and their community, then this is the premise of presenting this particular advice. And I think that there are a lot of things that could be said on this particular matter, but I believe that I want to get, start with the very foundational part of one's 501c3. Because in a lot of cases, we find that 501c3s are started, in the masjid is a 501c3, and what ends up happening is the people that initiate the project or the organization, there may be a bunch of brothers upon the minhaj, so to speak, but in reality, they add nothing of value to the organization in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, they're just names on the paper. They have the control. You got to keep it, the organization in the control under the control of people that are on the minhaj and thus forth and so on. But they, from an organizational perspective, have no value with them. And this is why you find that when looking at communities of this nature, these communities are doing the bare minimum and dependent upon the financial help of the people in the local community. And that's it. They don't pull from any. They don't go after grant money. They don't. Regardless if it's governmental or philanthropic or whatsoever. They don't go after any. They don't do anything else. And so, I believe that this all starts from the fundamental aspect of the organizing of the entity. And so, this is what my nasiha is going to be based and built upon, that fundamental aspect of the entity. And so when dealing with nonprofits, it's known that a nonprofit usually has a board. Now, whatever term you want to call it, a board of trustees, board of directors, all of these names in reality point to the same thing. So it usually consists of a board. And when you start up a nonprofit for the first time, that board may also be the executive committee. Now, one thing that needs to be understood is that the board of directors and the executive committee are two different entities. Two different entities. Now, the members that are on the board can be the executive committee, and that's usually what happens when people first start up a nonprofit. But as the nonprofit gets bigger, then the board hires people to be placed in that executive committee position, usually. So as it relates to the masjid, when I'm dealing with the board, we're going to look at it like the board is one entity and the executive committee is another. And it's the executive committee that has to be organized properly. Why? Because the executive committee executes the goals and the vision and the mission of the board. Meaning the executive committee basically runs the nonprofit, the functionality of the nonprofit. But the board sets the agenda for the nonprofit. And the board of directors or trustees, they're usually a group of people that don't get paid because it's looked at as a conflict of interest. But the executive committee, who will be considered like employees, do get paid. And when we're looking at masajid, then we know if a person starts a masjid in the beginning, they may not have the financial means to be able to pay an executive committee. But they should work towards being able to do that, because you want this executive committee to be spending their days working to bring the goals and the agenda of the organization to fruition. And I have to say that when dealing with masajid here in America, because we're not in the lands of the Muslims, there should be a mentality that the masjid, or the building in which a masjid may be in, that building should serve more than one purpose. And so for me, in reality, I think it's imperative that the Muslims start going after 10,000 square feet buildings, or 20,000 square feet buildings, or 30,000 square feet buildings, where a portion of the building is the masjid, but then you have other parts of the building utilized to serve the direct needs of the Muslims in that locality. Now, if I was to give an example of some of the needs of the Muslims, like for instance, a daycare. How many Muslims work and their children may be young to the point where they need child care? We have a situation where there are single mothers within the community. We have women that accept Islam, and prior to their Islam, they had children by men, and so they're on their own. They come into Islam, they're already working, and thus forth and so on, and they need child care. We want to have a situation, an Islamically favorable situation as it relates to child care, daycare, or night care, and thus forth and so on, for that child. We want to be able to provide that. Another example, would be like a gym, a men's gym and a women's gym. A lot of people, if we were just to take a look at the sisters for a second, there are a lot of sisters, especially after marriage, they want to keep in shape. But they can't go to the local gym in the locality due to the corruption that's in these gyms. They can't uncover themselves and like that. So we have to provide some of these services for these alternatives for them. We just can't say to them, "Oh, it looks like you can't work out anymore." We have to provide the alternatives for them in that regard, because we are in a country where doing these simple things, you won't find Islamically compliant places for brothers and sisters to do these simple things. So at any rate, but that's another discussion in and of itself. So going back to the executive committee of the entity or the organization that is the masjid. First and foremost, the executive committee. Now, the executive committee usually consists of a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and then you can add on whoever else thereafter. But because we're dealing with a religious entity, specifically a masjid or / Islamic center, then you want to have a head of religious affairs. And if you want to be politically correct when you put things on paper with the government, you could just put president. But you want to have a head of religious affairs, and the head of religious affairs, in my personal opinion, should be someone that has went overseas and sat with the scholars and benefited. Why? Because you shouldn't have someone that is ignorant as it relates to the religion being over the religious affairs. It's clearly simple. It's quite simple. That understanding is quite simple. So that should be a student of knowledge without a doubt. So it should have a head of religious affairs. 2, it should have a head of daily operations. And that could be the vice president. And this is as it relates to the executive committee. 3, there should, of course, be a treasurer. 4, there should be a secretary, because that's mandatory as it relates to running a nonprofit. 5, there should definitely be a media director. And then 6, there should be a head of security. Now, in the beginning, the head of security may not be needed, but if you're growing the masjid into a viable entity, where it serves the community, the local community in varying aspects, and at some point you're going to need security to ensure that the attendees of the masjid are safe. And so, when looking at these positions, then each of these positions, their roles should clearly be defined. Their roles should clearly be defined so that nobody is stepping on the other's toes as it relates to their roles. So when we look at just going through the head of religious affairs, and this is something I wrote out, I wrote all this stuff out for a masjid when brothers requested my input for a particular masjid. But the head of religious affairs, I'll read what I wrote. The head of religious affairs will manage and supervise the overall religious affairs of the masjid, examining the condition of its attendees and meeting their needs in a manner that fosters upliftment of their condition in a religious sense. Thus, all religious practices normally conducted at the masjid, regardless if they are obligatory or recommended, will be his direct responsibility. And then you have some bullet points. For instance, conduct the Friday sermons, or appoint another to do so. Lead the 5 daily prayers, or appoint another to do so. Conduct weekly classes and or arrange classes conducted by others. Propose and or initiate seminars, lecture series, and annual conferences. Conduct, and I notice that I put here propose these things, but not organize these things, because that's the duty of someone else. But propose and or initiate seminars, lecture series, and annual conferences. Conduct or appoint another to conduct the Eid prayers. Lead or appoint another to lead Tarawih. Approve all religious content placed on the organization's social media. Approve all religious content placed in the masjid. Responsible for the guardianship of single Muslimat without Muslim fathers, or the setting up of a committee that addresses these types of sisters' needs. And of course, and those are all the bullet points as it relates to what I placed here, but of course, and whatever duty that is considered to be a part of the religious affairs that will fall on, then those duties will fall under his authority, for lack of better expressions. Moving on to the head of daily operations, and what the head of daily operations, what his role should be. The head of daily operations has the sole responsibility of planning, executing, monitoring, and completing all affairs directly related to the basic functionality of the masjid or Islamic center. This is what the person in daily operations should be doing. And then, to give examples from bullet points, ensures that the masjid is open daily for the prayers, Jumu'ah, etc., and closed. Manages and oversees the janitorial responsibilities of the masjid. Now, manages and oversees, it doesn't mean that he has to get a mop and do it himself. But he may want to set up a subcommittee for that. And this is what I mean when we have to be organized. That you have this executive committee and everybody has their role. And depending on your role, if your role needs to set up a subcommittee specific to what you're over, what that person is over, in order to ensure that those duties are being fulfilled, then that's what this person or the members of the executive committee should be able to do without hindrance from other people. Without hindrance. Manages and oversees the upkeep of the masjid's landscape. Manages the repairs of the masjid. Manages the renovation and or new construction to the masjid. Manages, and I put masjid, but I'm going to, when I say masjid and or Islamic center, based off what I said previously, that we need to buy bigger buildings that in which we can accommodate more of the needs of the community outside of just the having a musalla. Manages the setting up, and then I put in parentheses, not planning, but manages the setting up of all events of the organization, regardless if an event is on the grounds of the masjid or elsewhere. And what I mean by setting up, because this person is the head of daily operations, once the plan has been made for some type of event to be, the organization is throwing some type of event, then the head of daily operations will go in and set up the event, meaning where the event, the venue that the event is taking place. The head of daily operations responsibility will make sure that the sound system is there, the chairs are there that are necessary for the people, that the necessary tables are set up. If the masjid would be vending, or if the masjid is allowing others to vend, then they will oversee. This person would oversee all that, manage and oversee these particular duties. He wouldn't plan it though, because that's someone else's duty. Next, we have the treasurer. The treasurer, preferably someone with CPA or accountant education and experience, manages and or oversees the management of the financial affairs of the organization, including management of the financial records, fundraising, and allocation of funds. And then I have in parentheses, or under that, the duties. Opens and maintains all bank accounts for the organization. Presents financial records at all board meetings, because when the board has meetings, when they're dealing with the executive committee, usually the person that answers to the board on the executive committee would be the president or CEO of the organization. And he is the one that usually deals with the board. He's like the go-between between the board and the executive committee. He's the one that answers to the board. So the financial records, when it comes time to dealing with all of that, then the treasurer definitely makes all that apparent to the president and the rest of the people of the executive committee when the executive committee has its meetings, because they have to be able to determine what they can and cannot do. But as usual, the president, being a liaison between the executive committee and the board, he has to be able to present these things to the board in a detailed manner. And so the treasurer is very vital in that regard. Manages payroll, initiates and organizes fundraisers for the masjid. So the person just can't be someone who, looks after the bank account and manages the bank account. He also has to be somebody that's talented in raising funds himself. He knows how to go about doing that, regardless if it's fundraisers for the masjid, or going after grant money. The treasurer should have an understanding of that. Even if the treasurer doesn't know how to write a grant proposal himself, he should have somebody that he goes back to that does do that. And we have Muslims that offer that service. And those are usually paid services as well. Puts together or has put together business plans for the organization. responsible for annual IRS filings for the organization, and that's real important. The organization is going to have to file, I can't recall the name of the form, but every year they're going to have to make a filing for the organization. So the treasurer should be responsible for that. And likewise, responsible for the payment of all utility bills of the organization. So you can kind of get it. You kind of get an understanding of what the treasurer's duties would be. The secretary. The secretary manages all the organization's internal communications amid the board. He prepares or keeps track of board meeting dates, meeting agendas, and minutes of meetings. So this is as it relates to the board, and it's also applicable to the executive committee as well, if the board and executive committee are two different entities, meaning or have two different members. So some of the duties of the secretary: arranges all board meetings which consist of the following. 1, contact all board members for their availability to set a date for meetings. Now again, that applies to the executive committee as well. Arranges the itinerary of the meeting, record minutes of the meeting, provide all members with necessary material for a productive meeting. He also, from the duties of the secretary, he provides all members with detailed recorded actions and decisions of the board. He also organizes and or arranges all proposed events at the masjid or elsewhere from a logistical perspective. So the secretary would do this. He's the one that organizes and or arranges the events that the head of religious affairs may propose. He organizes it. He gets it together. The flyers, he puts together the plans for all that. The same thing with the treasurer. When the treasurer is proposing fundraisers, then he has to take his proposal to the secretary. The secretary then will arrange and or organize that fundraiser. That's that person's duty. So this is all for the purpose of not putting too many hats on one person and consequently burning them out. I know about a situation where it was students of knowledge that were over the masjid, and they had nobody that could do duties of this nature. And so it burns out those students because they're inadequate as it relates to dealing with some of these organizational aspects that are being discussed here. And in reality, that should never have been their duties. It should never have been their duties. Media director. The media director deals with the day-to-day media management for the organization, which constitutes strategic media planning and execution. Basically, the media director oversees all things related to public relations and branding. And so, duties: designs or has another design all logos for the organization, along with ensuring that they're trademarked. Develop or has another develop all websites of the organization, yani the main website and all subsidiary sites. He also maintains and updates all websites. He also opens and maintains all accounts on various social media platforms for the organization. That consists of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and thus forth and so on. And in my opinion, those three things should be mandatory. Those things should be mandatory, that they're opened and maintained. And then manages the recording of all seminars, lectures, sermons, and conferences, regardless if the recordings are audio or visual. And like I said, in order for him to pull this off, he may have to set up a subcommittee as well for these duties to be handled. Head of security. The head of security manages and oversees the securing of the masjid grounds or / Islamic Center grounds, personnel, and attendees in order to ensure the safety and security of all people, yani staff or otherwise, frequenting the masjid, likewise their property. In addition, he will also ensure the protection of the masjid / Islamic center's guards grounds from vandalism, theft of property, burglary, and any other crime possibly perpetrated by outside influence that threaten the masjid / Islamic center's safety and security. And that's important too, because the more money that comes in, the bigger threats from outside influence that are probable. So a head of security will be necessary. And from the duties of the head of security, manages the securing of the parking lot, ensuring that all cars are parked properly, that all cars within the lot belong to attendees of the masjid. Manages the securing of the outside perimeter during religious worship or events. Manages the securing of the interior of the masjid, especially during religious worship, yani, Jumu'ah, Eid prayers, etc. Oversees the monitoring of all outside perimeter surveillance equipment if installation is needed. Reports any irregularities of the masjid grounds found from patrols or inspections of the grounds to the executive committee. And so you kind of get a glimpse of some of the duties that are not mentioned here that are related to security, how that will fall under his authority, the head of security's authority. The main point, ya ibadallah, is that we have to become more organized if we want to see the goals of our dawah come to fruition. And we have to start utilizing the talents within our communities, people that have these talents, that could fulfill these roles. And we need to leave off biases that we may have. Oh, he's not a student, or he's not this, or oh, he's not that. It's really not about that. It's about, is the person capable of doing the job? And if they're capable of doing the job, to put them in play in order to do that job, so that the community benefits, so that the community advances its agenda in the local area. Because quite honestly, we need to stop having these stagnant masjids that are constantly dependent upon begging the people every Friday for funds. And the only reason why it's like this is because in reality, we're not organized. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala knows best. I won't take too much time. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.